What's up, my guy? So I'm Miss Altman. I am the biology teacher up here at the school, and Miss Watson asked me if I would record a little something to kind of maybe help with genetics. Genetics is pretty complicated, so hopefully this won't be too long. Let me make myself small. All right, so I'm just gonna pretend like you don't know anything about it, and we're just gonna start from the beginning. So basically, here you have your DNA, obviously, and your DNA is the material in the cell that codes for things, and it, tells your body what to do and how to function, and it's the blueprint for you. Now, within that DNA, and you can see kind of here, because the DNA is really long, it usually wraps up into like tight little curls, and then even further down, I like to imagine it like a ball of yarn. Like, you have the string, but you twist it down into the ball. You have individual sections on the DNA right here that code for a certain trait. We call those genes. Okay, so like this set of DNA right here on this chromosome, which is just another fancy word to say crunched up DNA. This gene codes for eye color. Like my eyes are green, so that means that on my DNA, I have a little section that says Miss Altman's eyes are green. Okay, now because I am half my mother and half my father, just because mommy plus daddy equals baby, I also have some information on how to make brown eyes, because that's what my dad gave me. So I'm using the gene for green eyes that my mom gave me, but I still have that gene for brown eyes that my dad gave me. And that's where we're getting into genetics. Okay, so genetics is basically just the study of how heredity and how traits and how, things about you pass from parent to child. Okay, so like all of the things, all of the physical traits that your parents display, you have, and then your body's just kind of picking and choosing which ones it's using. So moving on each chromosome, which is this right here, so we're taking all this DNA and we're wrapping it up really tightly, we kind of get this looking shape. You have a gene for hair color, okay? And each individual gene has different alleles, and that's kind of like flavors. So for example, I have brown hair. I have the brown allele for the hair gene. Excuse me, you may have the red allele for the hair gene, or the, blonde allele for the hair gene. So alleles are just like different flavors of that gene. Let's see here. A lot of times in genetics, whenever we're talking about traits, we use P's, like P's, because they're very, very simple. Okay, like if, I have brown hair, my husband has blonde hair, we could have a red-haired baby. Human genetics is kind of a dumpster fire. But pea plants have very, very simple DNA. It's like you're either tall or short. You're either white flower or purple flower. So it's very, very like one or the other, and there is not a lot of in between. And so that's why we use pea plants a lot in genetics, just because they're very easy to talk about. So if we look at these flowers here, these are actually pea plant flowers, and describing what the actual thing looks like is called the phenotype. I usually remember that because phenotype means physical, but it's just the appearance of that gene. So like this flower right here has the DNA to make purple flowers, and then purple is that phenotype, okay? Brown hair is a phenotype. Blue eyes is a phenotype, okay? So it's just physically what does that chunk of DNA end up looking like. And then down here, these are called genotypes, okay? And this is just a way to represent, it's kind of a shorthand to represent what that DNA is actually saying. So instead of having to do all of this nonsense where we look at the actual DNA and we code and write down what that DNA says, we're kind of shorthanding it into these things. So this is called the genotype, and it is a representation of the genetic makeup of that organism. So within these genotypes, because the phenotype is pretty easy, it's just what color is it, how tall is it, how fat is it, whatever. But let me see if I can, yeah. So within these genotypes, and this is a chart showing the traits in a pea plant. These are pretty much, they might be called different things, but these are pretty much all of what they are. So you have some traits that are dominant and you have some traits that are recessive. So a dominant trait means that that trait is big and in charge, and if it's there, it's going to be represented in the phenotype, and like it's the dominant trait. So for pea plants, the dominant trait for the shape of a pea is round, okay? But you can sometimes get a wrinkly pea. This is a recessive trait, okay, which means that it's part of the DNA. It can be something that is inherited. It is a type of allele. So we have this gene for shape, and then we have the round and wrinkled alleles, okay, just like we have the gene for hair color, and we have brown and blonde. A really good example of this with just people is like red hair is a recessive trait. That's why you don't see a lot of people with red hair, because you have to get it from your parents, and you have to get both recessive traits. Okay, so basically, if you inherit a dominant trait like any of these guys for this pea plant, you're going to look like that. Okay, if you inherit a recessive trait, you have to get double dose before you can express the trait, because they're just not as strong of genes as the dominant genes are. Not to say that like blue eyes or red hair or another recessive trait is when like your earlobe doesn't like make like a whoop. It's more like just goes into your head. They're called attached ears. That's a recessive trait. It's not that those are weaker traits. It's just that you have to get double those traits, those genes. You have to get one from your mom and one from your dad in order to get it, as opposed to you only need one from one parent to get these dominant traits. So generally, when an organism has, like for example, if we're talking about brown hair, if an organism has two dominant traits, like I got brown from my mom and brown from my dad, I would be considered homozygous. Homo means same, okay? And so homozygous just means, I have two of those dominant alleles. I got a big B for brown hair from my mom, and I got a big B for brown hair from my dad. Okay, now the way that we represent the recessive traits, because these would both be dominant, is with lowercase letters. So here I got a brown hair from my mom, and maybe I got red hair from my dad. It's just not the dominant trait. You always do the dominant like initial with your alleles, always. I'm not sure why, it'd just be like that. So we would call this heterozygous, because this is opposite. Hetero means different. So I got a brown hair from my mom, brown is dominant. I got a red hair from my dad, and red is recessive, okay? Now, if I was homozygous recessive, then I would have maybe red hair or blonde hair or whatever. But this is what heterozygous recessive looks like. And the only way that you can get those traits is to inherit both of them from your mom or your dad. So like here, for example, I would have brown hair. Here, for example, I would have brown hair because I have this big B. But here I don't have the big B for brown, so I would get whatever other hair color this little b stands for. Okay, so homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, heterozygous for whatever trait we're talking about. Now, the law of independent assortment says that whenever your mommy and your daddy, like say this is your mommy has brown hair, and this is your daddy has red hair, okay? Whenever they have a baby, eggs and sperm cells are not complete cells. They don't have a complete set of the DNA. They only have a half set. That's why you can take half mom and half dad and put them together to make a whole new baby. So the law of independent assortment says that when your mom, who is homozygous dominant for brown hair, when she has a baby, she's going to make an egg cell that is just that, and an egg cell that is just that. Okay, and then when your daddy has a baby, he is going to make sperm cells that are like this and like this, so that when you combine them together, they make a whole baby. Okay, so if we look at some examples of the law of independent assortment, and we're going to use pea plants because I have basically just been lying to you for 3.5 minutes, because human hair color is a dumpster fire, and it is part hereditary, part environment, and everything is a nightmare. So that's why we talk about peas, because they're really easy to talk about. But if we have a pea plant that is, my marker back, homozygous recessive for purple flowers. So homozygous, which means it has two of the same, and it is recessive. Oh, we will have homozygous recessive like that. And we set it up in a T-chart like this so that you can see, hey, when this homozygous recessive for purple has a baby, this is going to be an egg cell and this is going to be an egg cell. And then let's say that they have a baby with a homozygous dominant for purple, okay? So when those babies combine, or when those alleles combine to make a baby, we're gonna have this big P, and Punnett squares are just a chart that kind of shows you what the probability of the babies will look like, okay? So we have this big P that has moved over, and we'll bring this little p down. And so basically what we are seeing here is we have a 4 out of 4 chance of having a baby that looks like this. And this is heterozygous, which means that whatever this big P stands for is what they will look like. So this is the genotype, and the phenotype of this would be purple flower. Purple. Okay. So, yes. Let's do another example before we talk about dihybrids, because dihybrids are terrifying. Let's say we're talking about, we have a heterozygous tall pea plant, and we want it to have a baby with a heterozygous tall pea plant. Draw my crazy looking little T chart here. So I'm going to take this T and I'm going to bring it down. And I'm going to take this T and I'm going to bring it down. And I'm going to take this T and bring it over. And this T and bring it over. And so if these two plants were to have a baby, if both heterozygous tall plants were to have a baby, this is what their kids might look like. So we would have 1 tall, 2 tall, 3 tall. So 3 out of those 4 would have the phenotype tall, and 1 out of the 4 would have the phenotype short. And again, human genetics is very complicated, but this is how you can have, like, my mom is 5'5", my dad is 5'9", and I am 6'1". I am this one, okay? I am this weird one that, you know, I got those genes from my grandpa, not necessarily my mom or my dad. So that's how that kind of stuff works. Or like how your mom and your dad can both have brown hair and you can be blonde, okay? It's because sometimes you get this kind of situation going on. Okay, I'm actually going to stop the video here, and I'm going to ask Miss Watson if I need to do one on dihybrid, because dihybrid is a nightmare. Hi. So I'm going to go talk to her about that, but I'm going to stop this one here and publish it and whatever, and hit me up if you have any more questions. I'm sorry this was really crazy and fast. I hope that maybe it helped a little bit. I know sometimes it helps to just hear it. So, okay. Bye-bye.